I walked in, exhausted from the long day, expecting nothing more than a quiet evening. Instead, I was greeted by an eerie silence, one that didn't belong in my home. My mother, my wife, my sons, and my best friend, Peter, all sat on the couch, their faces unreadable, their eyes avoiding mine. The room felt off. Something was wrong. It wasn't the usual tension that sometimes lingered when I got home late. It wasn't the lingering smell of burnt food from Doris's failed attempts at cooking. It wasn't even the way my son sat stiffly, as if bracing for impact. No, this was something deeper, something deliberate. I set my briefcase down, rolling my shoulders as I tried to read the air. "What's wrong?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain steady. No one spoke immediately. The hesitation sent a ripple of unease down my spine. Then my eldest son, Michael, cleared his throat and said something that I would never forget. "Dad, sit down. You need to accept a new reality. You're not in charge of this family anymore. Uncle Peter is more like a father to us now." The words sliced through me. I blinked, convinced I had misheard. "Excuse me." My voice was calm, too calm for the fire that suddenly roared inside my chest. Michael wouldn't look at me. His fingers drummed against his knee, a nervous tic he had since childhood. But I wasn't focused on him anymore. I was focused on the one person who had every reason to intervene. Doris. She sat there, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression unreadable. Not shocked, not apologetic, just neutral. She knew. They all did. My mother shifted slightly, exhaling as if this moment had been inevitable. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't outraged. She was complicit. Peter, my so-called best friend, didn't flinch. His posture remained relaxed, as if this entire thing was just another business meeting. He looked comfortable. Too comfortable. Like he belonged there. Like he had been in my seat for a while. The realization struck like a hammer to the chest. This wasn't new. This wasn't spontaneous. This had been planned. I stared at my sons, hoping, begging, for one of them to break. To hesitate. To show even a flicker of regret. But Michael was resolute. And Eric, my younger son, though less vocal, didn't look away. He didn't deny it. I took a slow, deliberate breath, pushing down the molten rage bubbling beneath my skin. I had spent years mastering the art of control, negotiating with ruthless men in the courtroom, breaking down opposing arguments with precision. But this wasn't a legal battle. This was war. And I had walked into an ambush. "Peter is more like a father to you," I repeated, my voice disturbingly even. Michael nodded, his jaw tightening. "Yeah." I didn't look at Peter yet. I wasn't ready to acknowledge him. Not yet. Instead, I turned my attention back to Doris. "Doris," I said, my voice laced with something sharp, something lethal. "Is there anything you'd like to add?" For the first time, her composure cracked. She inhaled sharply, smoothing down the fabric of her dress, as if that would erase the weight of her betrayal. She wasn't ready for this conversation. That was my first real victory. "I think it's best if we all—" I held up a hand. "No. No generic, rehearsed statements. No deflections. Tell me, Doris, when exactly did my role as your husband and their father expire? Was it gradual? Or did you make the decision in a single night while lying in my bed?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. That was my second victory. She hadn't expected resistance. She had thought I would either explode or break. Instead, I was calculating. Cold. Controlled. And then, finally, I turned to Peter. Peter, the man I had once trusted with everything. The man who had been there for the birth of my children, who had toasted at my wedding, who had celebrated my victories and grieved my losses. The man I had called a brother. And now, he sat in my house, in my presence, waiting for me to acknowledge that he had won. He was waiting for me to lose control. I smiled. A small, slow, unsettling smile. The kind of smile that made opposing lawyers nervous in the courtroom. Peter's confidence faltered for the first time. And that was my third victory. I exhaled, stepping back, straightening my cuffs like this entire situation was nothing more than an interesting footnote in my evening. The room was suffocating. The walls were closing in. But I wouldn't let them see it. I wouldn't let them have the satisfaction of knowing they had wounded me. Instead, I turned toward the door. "You have something to say?" Peter finally spoke, his voice smooth, controlled. Cocky. I paused, tilting my head slightly, letting the moment stretch uncomfortably, letting the tension coil. Then I chuckled. A low, knowing chuckle. That was my fourth victory. Without another word, I walked out. Because this wasn't the night I lost. No, this was the night I prepared. And by the time they realized what was coming, it would be far too late. I closed the door behind me and stood in the hallway, listening. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then, a shift, the sound of movement, of relieved exhalations. They thought I was gone. That was my confirmation. They had expected an explosion, a confrontation, a desperate plea for answers. But they didn't understand who I was. I walked down the hall, past the framed family photos that suddenly felt like mockery. Lies frozen in time. The smiling faces. The staged happiness. The illusion of loyalty. My wife. My mother. My sons. And Peter. The betrayal wasn't what stunned me the most. No, it was how normal they made it seem. They had decided. Without me. They had moved on. Without me. I entered my study, shutting the door behind me with the same eerie calm I had maintained in the living room. I sat in my chair, leaning back, my hands folding neatly in front of me. And then I exhaled. The rage sat there, waiting. It wanted to be unleashed. It begged for destruction. I could destroy that living room right now. Flip the table. Shatter the glasses. Drag Peter out by his throat and introduce his smug face to the pavement outside. But violence is short-lived. Pain fades. Bruises heal. Revenge should be permanent. And for that, I needed patience. The pieces fall into place. I had ignored the signs. Not because I was blind, but because I had chosen to trust. My mother's influence had always been strong. Too strong. She had chosen Doris for me. Not directly. Not explicitly. But she had shaped the narrative. Made sure I saw Doris as inevitable. A good wife. A proper woman. Someone who would build a life with me. And she had been right. Doris was all those things. Until she wasn't. Until she decided that being my wife wasn't enough anymore. I leaned forward, my fingers tapping lightly against the desk. Peter. Of all the men in the world, why him? I had considered the possibility of infidelity before. It's an occupational hazard when you're a lawyer. You see too many marriages fall apart, too many betrayals, too many quiet affairs unfolding behind closed doors. I had once convinced myself that if it ever happened to me, I would know, that I would feel it. But I hadn't, because it hadn't been a singular betrayal. It had been a transition, a slow, careful replacement, a planned coup. The mistakes they made. They had miscalculated. They thought my silence meant acceptance. They believed I was too old to fight back, too invested to walk away. But the truth? I was already gone. Not in the physical sense. Not yet. But emotionally, mentally, I had detached. And once a man stops caring, once he stops believing that anything can be salvaged, he becomes dangerous. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake? They assumed I had nothing left to lose. They thought they had taken everything from me. But they forgot. I was a lawyer. And power isn't about emotions. It's about leverage. And I had leverage. More than they could possibly imagine. The plan forms. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling through my contacts. First, I called my financial advisor. James, I said, my voice steady. Effective immediately, I want all funds in our joint accounts frozen. He hesitated. Sir, are you sure? That includes your wife's access. I know exactly what it includes. Understood. Click. First move made. Then, I dialed my lawyer. Stan, I said, my voice even smoother now. I need an expedited divorce filing. Non-negotiable. David. Now Stan. A pause. Then a sigh. I'll have the paperwork ready by morning. Second move made. Then, finally, I called an old friend. Someone who owed me favors. Someone who specialized in ruining people. And with that, the wheels began turning. I sat back, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of my next steps. They thought they had won. They thought I had walked away, licking my wounds. But I wasn't running. I was preparing. And by the time they realized it, it would be too late. The next morning, the storm hit. Not with thunder, not with lightning, but with silence. It started when Doris went to make her usual online transfer, some payment for the house, maybe a casual splurge on one of those expensive boutique items she claimed were necessary purchases. But this time, instead of the transaction going through, the screen blinked red. Transaction declined. She frowned, refreshing the page. Still the same message. She tried again, this time on her phone, switching between accounts. Declined. Doris wasn't stupid. She knew something was wrong. That's when she grabbed her coat, slid into her Mercedes, the one I bought for her birthday, and drove to the bank, where reality finally slapped her in the face. The frozen accounts. Mrs. Landon, the bank manager said, shifting uncomfortably behind his desk. Yes. Doris snapped, already irritated. What's the issue? My account says there's a security hold. I need it removed. The manager hesitated. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Doris narrowed her eyes. And why not? He took a breath, clearly wishing he wasn't the one delivering the news. Because your husband issued a freeze on all joint accounts. His lawyer provided the necessary documents. Legally, we cannot grant you access without his authorization. Doris's breath hitched. That's ridiculous. I have access to these accounts. I have for years. Yes, ma'am, the manager said, nodding politely. And now you don't. A slow horror crept into her eyes. The truth settled in, sinking deep. I had cut her off. Completely. She had never thought I would do it. Not after all these years. Not after everything we built. She thought I would break. But instead, I starved them first. The credit cards declined. By the time Doris left the bank, she was calling Peter, her hands shaking. I imagine the conversation was something like this. Peter, he froze everything. What do we do? But Peter had his own problems. Because as she panicked over the bank, I had moved to phase 2. Her credit cards. While she was storming into her bank branch, I was shutting down every single line of credit she had access to. By the time she tried to use her platinum card at a cafe on her way home, it was declined. She tried another. Declined. Tried the emergency one she kept in her purse. Declined. And that was when the fear truly set in. Peter's business crumbles. While Doris was struggling, Peter was stepping into his own personal nightmare. See, Peter had built his business in large part because of me. Not because he was particularly smart. Not because he was a financial genius. No, because I had pulled strings for him. Because I had gotten him clients. Because I had given him access to the right people, the right investors, the right markets. And now, I was pulling the rug out from under him. One by one, his major investors started backing out. First, the construction firm that had funneled work through him for years suddenly canceled all future contracts. Then the biggest supplier for his company sent a polite but firm email. We regret to inform you that, due to unforeseen circumstances, we are terminating our partnership effective immediately. Peter didn't know it yet, but his business had hours to live. By lunchtime, 2 more investors had walked away. By dinner, the company's cash flow was suffocating. And by the time he checked his own accounts, they were in the red. I hadn't just cut him off from my life. I had cut off his survival. The house of cards collapses. While Doris and Peter were separately falling apart, my sons, Michael and Eric, were about to have their own rude awakening. Because the truth was, they had never really appreciated the life I provided. Everything they had, from their Ivy League tuition to the luxury cars in their driveways, was because of me. And yet, they had turned on me. They had called Peter their father. They had replaced me in their minds before I had even walked out of that house. So I gave them exactly what they wanted. I let them live without me. The first thing to go? Their tuition payments. Michael, who was midway through his master's degree, suddenly got a notice. Your tuition bill is past due. If not paid within 7 days, your enrollment will be suspended. Eric, who had grown used to his carefree lifestyle, found his monthly allowance gone. No warning. No explanation. Just gone. They called their bank. And just like their mother, they were given the same cold answer. Your father has revoked all access to these funds. You no longer have authorization. Panic ensues. By evening, the phone calls began. Doris called. My sons called. Peter called. Even my mother, the woman who raised me, the woman who orchestrated half of this betrayal, called. I didn't answer a single one. Not yet. Not until they had fully realized it. Not until they had felt the loss. Not until they understood, with absolute certainty, that the man they had dismissed, the man they had replaced, was the only reason they had anything in the first place. By nightfall, I imagine they all sat in that same living room. The same room where they had made their decision. Only this time, the air was different. This time, they weren't the ones in control. They were drowning. And I was watching them sink. Peter sat in his office, sipping his usual overpriced coffee, blissfully unaware that his world was collapsing. For years, Peter had built his business on connections. Not hard work. Not intelligence. Connections. And those connections? They were mine. From the moment he started his so-called company, He had leaned on my influence, my clients, my investors, my reputation, and I had helped him. I had built him, because at the time, he was my best friend, my brother in all but blood. But now, I was going to unmake him. The first blow, the vanishing investors. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an email. Subject, contract termination. Peter skimmed the message, his forehead creasing. Due to unforeseen financial circumstances, we regret to inform you that our ongoing contract with your firm is terminated effective immediately. His jaw tightened. The sender? One of his biggest investors. The one that kept his cash flow steady. He set the phone down, running a hand through his hair, trying to shake off the unease creeping into his bones. This was nothing. A misunderstanding. Something that could be fixed with a phone call. He dialed immediately, forcing a smile when his contact answered. Hey, Chris. Just saw the email. What's going on? A pause. A long one. Then Chris sighed. Peter, I'm sorry, man. I really am. But we can't be involved with you anymore. Peter's fingers tightened around the phone. What? Why? What's changed since last week? A beat of silence. Then, the words that made his stomach drop. David. Everything went cold. What about him? Peter forced out. Chris hesitated again, then lowered his voice. Look, Peter, I don't know what happened between you two, but well, let's just say he's making it clear that doing business with you is a bad move. Peter shot up from his chair, knocking his coffee onto his desk. This is ridiculous, he snapped. David wouldn't do that. He's not. Chris cut him off. He's a powerful man, Peter. A respected one. And between you and me, if I had to choose between keeping business with him or keeping business with you, another pause, I'd pick him every time. Click. The line went dead. The dominoes fall. Peter stood frozen, the phone still pressed against his ear long after the call ended. No, this wasn't possible. David was many things, controlled, strategic, even ruthless in court, but he wasn't the kind of man to destroy someone's life. Was he? His phone rang again. Another investor. The message? The same. Then another. And another. By noon, four major clients had pulled out. By 3 p.m., his suppliers refused to answer his calls. By 5 p.m., his entire business was gasping for air. And then came the final, fatal blow. The licenses revoked. Peter was still reeling when his secretary walked in, her face pale. Sir, she said hesitantly, we just got a notice from the licensing board. He looked up, his stomach twisting. What? She swallowed hard, setting the document on his desk. Slowly, he picked it up and read the first line. Effective immediately, the following business licenses have been revoked due to legal concerns regarding conflicts of interest and ethical violations. The rest of the words blurred. His business was dead. Officially. Legally. Irrevocably. Peter's realization. He sank back in his chair, his breathing shallow. This wasn't just bad luck. This was a precision strike. A targeted hit. And there was only one person capable of executing something like this. David. His old friend. His brother. The man he had stabbed in the back. And now, Peter was learning the hard way that David didn't just get even. He made sure you never got back up. The desperate call. By the time Peter gathered his thoughts, he had 69 missed calls. Half were from Doris. The other half, investors, employees, clients, all panicking, all trying to figure out what the hell was happening. And through it all, David hadn't answered once. Peter gritted his teeth and dialed again. Straight to voicemail. The same voicemail message that had played every single time he had tried to call that day. You've reached David Landon. I'm unavailable. Leave a message. Beep. Peter exhaled sharply, gripping the phone. David, he started, his voice strained. I don't know what you're doing, but you need to stop. Silence. He swallowed hard. Look, I know we need to talk. Just call me back, okay? This has gone far enough. Click. Call ended. Message ignored. Peter stared at his phone, his heart pounding. For the first time in his life, he was afraid. Because David wasn't just mad. He wasn't just retaliating. He was erasing Peter from existence. And there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. The house was quiet that evening. Too quiet. Doris sat in the living room, gripping her phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The lamp beside her cast a dim, flickering glow, barely illuminating the worry etched on her face. She had called David. Again and again. No answer. Not a single response. Her hands trembled as she tried to call Peter next, but even before the first ring, she already knew what was coming. The same voicemail. The number you are trying to reach is unavailable. Doris exhaled shakily, looking across the room. Michael sat stiffly on the couch, staring at his laptop, but he wasn't typing. His screen was frozen on something, a notification from his university. Eric, on the other hand, was pacing. He was never the one to sit still when things weren't going his way. And right now, nothing was going their way. Doris knew it. Her sons knew it. But no one wanted to say it out loud, because that would mean admitting it. Admitting that David had done the impossible, that he had ripped their entire foundation apart. The tuition funds disappear. Michael hadn't spoken in over an hour. Not since he opened his student portal to check on his next tuition payment. Not since he saw the bright red notice at the top of the screen. Urgent, tuition payment past due. Immediate payment required to remain enrolled. His stomach had dropped. That couldn't be right. His tuition was always paid in advance. He never even thought about it. But when he checked his financial records, his heart started racing. The money was gone. His father had pulled everything. Michael had always assumed, always believed, that his education was something guaranteed, that it would always be there, just like his father always had been. Now, he wasn't so sure about either. He thought back to what they had told him just last night. Uncle Peter is more like a father to us now. His stomach twisted. He had chosen wrong. Eric's lifestyle crumbles. Eric was the first one to break the silence. Mom, he snapped, running a hand through his hair. I just tried to buy gas, and my card was declined. Again, Doris barely reacted. She just kept staring at her phone, her mind elsewhere. He scoffed, pacing. I called the bank, guess what? My account has been drained. He spun around, looking at his mother and brother. Is anyone going to say it? Dad is cutting us off. Michael clenched his jaw, but still said nothing. Doris, however, finally let out a slow breath. Yes, she admitted. He is. Eric let out a bitter laugh, throwing his hands up. Well, that's just great. I mean, really, what did you think was going to happen? You let Uncle Peter walk all over him, and now we're all screwed. Doris snapped her head toward him. I didn't let Peter do anything, she hissed. Your father. She stopped herself, exhaling sharply. Your father is just retaliating. That's all. Eric scoffed again. Retaliating? Mom, wake up. Dad is burning everything down. And for the first time that day, Doris believed it. The phone call that changed everything. When the house phone rang, the entire room went still. Doris snatched it up so fast that she nearly dropped it. David, she breathed. But the voice on the other end wasn't David's. It was her mother, and her tone was sharp. Cold. Doris, Margaret said. Are you sitting down? Doris frowned, gripping the phone tighter. What's wrong? Margaret exhaled, as if preparing for something heavy. Then she said the words that made Doris's vision blur. Your father's retirement fund is gone. Doris's mouth went dry. What? She whispered. Margaret continued, her voice steady. I checked this morning. The accounts, the ones David managed for us, they're empty. Every last cent. We're broke, Doris. Doris couldn't breathe. But that's not possible. David wouldn't. Oh, wouldn't he? Margaret's voice sharpened. Because I think he would. And I think he just did. Doris's mind reeled. Her father, her mother, they had relied on David for years. His investments, his management, his ability to make things work. And now? Now it was all gone. She squeezed her eyes shut. Her own parents were paying for her mistake. And for the first time since this all began, she felt something she never thought she would. Regret. The realization hits. Doris barely remembered hanging up the phone. Everything was a blur. Her mother's voice still rang in her ears. We're broke. Her son's accusations still burned in her chest. What did you think was going to happen? And above all else, the silence from David was deafening. She had thought, naively, foolishly, that he would be angry, that he would yell, argue, throw accusations. But he hadn't. Instead, he had simply removed himself. And in doing so, he had destroyed everything. He had let them make their choice. And then he had shown them what that choice cost. And now, as she sat there, gripping her phone like a lifeline, Doris finally understood the brutal truth. David wasn't coming back. He wasn't going to save them. He wasn't going to fix it. And for the first time in her life, she realized. She had never actually known him. She had known the version of David who did everything for them. The version of David who loved her unconditionally. The version of David who never fought back. But the real David? The real David was the man who was watching them crumble. And he wasn't lifting a single finger to stop it. The house of cards collapses completely. That night, as Doris lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, she thought about how quickly everything had fallen apart. A single night. That's all it had taken. Yesterday, she had thought she had everything. Today, she had nothing. And worst of all, she had no one to blame but herself. Doris had never known fear like this. Not when she was a broke college student struggling to pass her finals. Not when she was a young mother, overwhelmed with twins crying through the night. Not even when she realized she no longer loved her husband the way she once had. No, this fear was different. Because this time, it wasn't just about her. This time, she had lost everything. And worse, she didn't know how to fix it. The house was in chaos. Her sons were panicking. Her mother was calling nonstop. Peter had gone silent. And the only person who could fix it, the man she had betrayed, wasn't answering her calls. The calls began. She tried one more time. The phone rang, and rang, and rang, straight to voicemail. You've reached David Landon. I'm unavailable. Leave a message. Doris clenched her jaw, fighting the burning in her throat. He was ignoring her. She tried texting. No response. She emailed. Nothing. Then, desperation took over. She picked up the house phone, because surely, he wouldn't ignore a call from his home. But he did. And that's when she knew. This wasn't a game. David wasn't coming back. The sons begged. Michael and Eric had never worried about money before. It was always there. Until now. Until their father, the man they had dismissed, replaced, mocked, had taken it all away. And they weren't handling it well. I don't understand, Michael muttered, pacing. He can't just cut us off like this, can he? Eric scoffed. Yeah, genius. He just did. Michael ran a hand through his hair. Okay, but Mom, he won't let us go homeless, right? He won't just abandon us. Doris swallowed hard. She wanted to say no. She wanted to tell them David would come back. But the words wouldn't come. Because she wasn't sure anymore. Eric grabbed his phone. Screw this. I'm calling him myself. He dialed. Voicemail. Michael tried next. Voicemail. Then they tried begging. Dad, come on. We were just upset. We didn't mean it. You're still our father, okay? Just call us back. Dad, please. We're sorry. Dad, we need you. But David never answered. And the silence hurt more than anything he could have said. Doris's last attempt. Doris knew what she had to do. She had to see him. Force him to listen. Force him to forgive her. So she got in her car, the one David had bought her, and drove straight to his office. But when she arrived, the receptionist wouldn't let her through. I'm sorry, Mrs. Landon, the woman said, her voice carefully neutral. Mr. Landon has given explicit instructions not to see you. Doris's stomach dropped. Not to see her? Her own husband? She forced a smile. Maybe you misunderstood. We're married. He'll see me. The receptionist hesitated. Then, with quiet sympathy, she handed Doris an envelope. Doris took it with trembling fingers, her heart hammering. She stepped aside, ripped it open, and pulled out a single document. A divorce petition. Filed. Signed. Ready. A note was attached. 5 simple words. There's nothing left to fix. Doris couldn't breathe. She had lost. And David? David had already moved on. The mother's warning. That night, when Doris got home, her mother was waiting. Margaret sat in the living room, hands clasped, watching as Doris stumbled through the door, shell-shocked. She already knew. Doris could see it in her eyes. The disappointment. The resignation. The judgment. I told you to be careful, Margaret said, her voice calm but sharp. Doris let out a bitter laugh. Careful? Careful about what, Mother? Margaret exhaled, shaking her head. About underestimating a man like David. Doris clenched her fists. You told me. I told you that men adjust, Margaret interrupted smoothly. I told you that your father adjusted. That doesn't mean David would. She gave Doris a long, cold look. I told you what you needed to do to keep him. And instead, you let your pride ruin everything. Doris gritted her teeth. I just wanted my freedom. Margaret nodded. And now you have it. Tell me, how does it feel? Doris said nothing. Because the answer? It felt like hell. Peter breaks. By midnight, Peter finally cracked. His business was gone. His finances were in ruins. His best friend had destroyed him. And for the first time, he realized why. Because he deserved it. Because David had trusted him. Because David had built him. And he had betrayed him. But he wasn't going to accept this. So he did the one thing he had left. He drove to David's house, stormed up the front steps, and pounded on the door. "David," he shouted, "come out and face me." Silence. Then, slowly, the front door opened, and there David stood, calm, unbothered, cold. Peter's rage faltered, because the man standing in front of him wasn't angry. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't out for revenge. He had already won. And Peter? Peter was already finished. David tilted his head slightly. "What exactly do you want, Peter?" he asked, voice calm. Peter swallowed. "You ruined me." David nodded. "Yes." Peter's hands clenched. "You had no right." David stepped forward, eyes dangerous. "I had every right," he murmured. And Peter, for the first time in his life, felt fear. Because David wasn't just getting even. He was making sure Peter never got up again. The final begging. Doris called one last time that night. One last attempt. One last plea. "David, please. We were wrong. I was wrong. Just talk to me. Just give me one more chance." But there was no response. And this time, there never would be. Because David was already gone. And he wasn't looking back. I watched the phone vibrate on the table. Doris. Again. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't hear it. Not because I was busy. But because she no longer deserved an answer. I let it ring. And ring. Until it stopped. Then, a minute later, another call. This time from Michael. Then Eric. Then Doris's mother. All of them. One after another. I let them all go to voicemail. Because for the first time in 19 years, I didn't owe them anything. Not my time. Not my patience. Not my presence. And certainly not my forgiveness. The confrontation they didn't see coming. I knew it wouldn't end there. I knew Doris well enough to expect the next move. So when she showed up at my office the next morning, I wasn't surprised. She stormed past the receptionist before anyone could stop her, slamming the door behind her. I leaned back in my chair, watching her. Her eyes were red, her hands shaking. She was desperate now. Good. She deserved to be. "David," she started, her voice raw. "Please." I didn't say anything. I just watched her, letting the silence do the work. She took a breath, swallowing hard. I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you." I tilted my head slightly. "Which part, Doris? The lying? The betrayal? The planning? The fact that you had no intention of stopping until I caught you?" She flinched. That was the truth, wasn't it? She wasn't sorry she had done it. She was sorry I found out. She took another step forward. "David, please," she whispered. "I love you." I let out a slow, quiet breath. Then I stood, walked around the desk, stopped right in front of her. And then I said the words that would finally end this. "No, you don't, Doris." Her breath caught. Her lips trembled. I didn't stop. You never did. Not in the way that mattered. Her eyes shone with tears. "That's not true." I cut her off. "You loved what I did for you. You loved what I provided. You loved the security, the lifestyle, the illusion. But me? The man? The husband? You haven't loved me for years, Doris. Maybe you never did." She shook her head rapidly, stepping closer. "That's not true. I made a mistake." I smiled. That small, cold, knowing smile. The one that finally made her stop. "You didn't make a mistake, Doris," I said softly. "You made a choice." And now, she had to live with it. The sons who chose the wrong side. By the time I got home that evening, my sons were waiting. Michael and Eric stood in the living room, arms crossed, their faces grim. I shut the door behind me and leaned against it. Silence. Then, finally, Michael spoke. "Dad, come on," he said, his voice tight. "Isn't this a little extreme?" I didn't respond. He sighed. "I mean, okay, we get it. Mom screwed up, but don't you think ruining us is a little much?" I raised an eyebrow. "Ruining you?" I repeated, voice flat. Eric scoffed, shaking his head. "Dad, we have nothing left. No money. No security. No future." I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I pushed off the door, walked right up to them, and said the words that finally made them understand. "Welcome to the life you thought I didn't matter in." Michael's mouth snapped shut. Eric swallowed. I tilted my head. "You thought I was just there, just existing, that my presence was optional, that I was just a provider, a bank account. And when you thought you had a replacement," I let out a quiet chuckle. "You dismissed me like I was nothing." They didn't speak, because they knew I was right. And now? Now, they wanted me to fix it. Now, they wanted my money, my security, my presence. But they had already chosen. And so had I. Peter's last attempt. I should have expected it. That final, desperate move. That night, As I packed the last of my things, Peter showed up, banged on my door. I opened it, unsurprised. He stood there, looking like a man who had lost everything. Because he had. "David," he started, his voice rough, "we need to talk." I didn't move. I didn't invite him in. I just looked at him. He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "I screwed up," he muttered. "I know that. But you destroyed me, man. You ruined my business, my reputation, my entire damn life." I let him talk. Let him spill his excuses, his regrets, his pathetic attempts to shift the blame. Then, finally, I spoke. "Good." Peter blinked. "What?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Good. I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything. To be betrayed by someone you trusted. To have the people you cared about turn their backs on you." He swallowed hard. "David, I didn't mean." I cut him off. "You did. And that's why I don't care." His face paled. For the first time, he understood. There was nothing to fix. There was no forgiveness. No second chance. I let the silence stretch between us. Then, finally, I shut the door. And locked it. Because Peter was already dead to me. The goodbye that wasn't really a goodbye. The next morning, I packed my bags. I had everything I needed. My wealth. My power. My freedom. I walked through the house one last time, letting my fingers trail over the furniture, the walls, the pieces of a life that was never truly mine. Then, without looking back, I walked out the door, leaving them behind. For good. And the best part? I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel regret. I felt free. Finally. Completely. Free. I stepped into the hotel lobby, feeling lighter than I had in years. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. "Welcome, Mr. Landon. Your suite is ready." "Thank you," I said, handing over my card, the one Doris couldn't touch. As she processed my check-in, I glanced at my phone. 67 missed calls. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. They were still begging, still scrambling to reach me, still trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. But it was too late. Because for the first time in 19 years, I wasn't theirs to manipulate anymore. I was done. And they were exactly where they deserved to be. The fallout begins. By the next morning, the desperation had reached its peak. I ignored their calls all night, but the messages kept coming. "Doris, David, please. I'm begging you. Just talk to me. Michael, Dad, come on. Let's just meet and figure this out. Eric, we screwed up. We know that. But we're still your family. Margaret, Doris's mother, David, enough of this. You've made your point." That one almost made me laugh. Made my point. No, I wasn't done making my point. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, as I watched everything unravel from a distance. Doris faces reality. Doris must have finally realized how deep she was in when she went to the bank, again. Except this time, she wasn't just trying to access her frozen accounts. She was trying to save herself. She wanted a loan. A desperate, last-minute attempt to keep up the illusion that everything wasn't falling apart. But she should have known better. Because when the loan officer looked at her records, all he saw was a woman with no financial stability. No job. No steady income. Nothing of her own. She had been comfortable for too long, relying on my money, my name, my influence. Now she had none of it. So when the bank denied her loan request, she walked out with a stunned, broken expression. Because for the first time in her life, she truly had nothing. Michael and Eric learned the hard way. Michael tried to keep up his usual confidence. He called his college, demanding they give him an extension on his tuition. He argued. He negotiated. He tried to leverage my name. But my name? It didn't belong to him anymore. The financial aid office wasn't interested in his excuses. They gave him a 7-day deadline. If he didn't come up with the payment, he was out. Eric, meanwhile, had his own wake-up call when he went to get his car serviced, only to find out the payments hadn't gone through. That's when it finally hit him. He didn't own his car. I did. And now? Now, the repo company was on its way to take it back. I imagined the look on his face when he realized he wasn't as independent as he thought. He had spent years thinking I was just a wallet. Now, he knew what it was like to live without it. Peter's final collapse. Peter was drowning. He had spent years riding on my connections, my influence, my generosity. He had stolen my wife, my family, my place. And now he had nothing. The moment I cut him off, his investors scattered. His business was already a corpse. But the real kicker? The lawsuits started rolling in. All those clients he had screwed over? The ones he had overcharged, the ones he had misled, the ones who trusted him because I vouched for him, they were coming for him now. And without my protection, he was finished. I imagined him sitting at his desk, staring at the pile of legal notices, realizing that the man he thought he had replaced had completely destroyed him. Good. Let him rot. The moment they broke. By the third day, the calls slowed. The messages turned from anger to pleading. They weren't demanding anymore. They weren't telling me to be reasonable. They were begging. And that's when I knew. I had won. I had broken them. I sat in my hotel suite, scrolling through the messages, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Because I was free. For the first time since I married Doris. For the first time since I had been manipulated into being the perfect husband and the perfect provider. I wasn't someone's safety net. I wasn't someone's backup plan. I wasn't someone's wallet. I was just me. And I liked that. The final call. It was a Friday evening when the last call came. I didn't expect to answer it. But something made me pick up. Not out of sympathy. Not out of regret. Just curiosity. I pressed the phone to my ear. Silence. Then, Doris's voice. Small. Broken. David. I didn't say anything. She exhaled shakily. I don't even know what to say. I took a sip of my drink. Then don't say anything. A pause. I need to understand. How do we end up here? I almost laughed. As if she didn't already know. But I answered anyway. We ended up here the moment you thought I was replaceable. She let out a quiet sob. Can't we fix this? She whispered. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No, Doris, I said calmly. We can't. Another silence. Then, her final plea. David, I still love you. I smiled. A slow, knowing, victorious smile. And then, finally, I gave her my answer. That's nice, I said. But I don't love you. And with that, I hung up. The last laugh. I leaned back in my chair, stretching. Outside my window, the city lights gleamed, endless and full of possibilities. I was free, and they were drowning. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Not anymore. Because I had made my choice. I had walked away. And for the first time in 19 years, I was truly, completely, unapologetically happy. It was just another typical day, or so I thought. I was out of town, visiting a client in Phoenix. The meeting had gone well, and I was wrapping up some paperwork in the quiet of the conference room when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Vanessa's name. I didn't think much of it, just the usual check-in, I assumed. Maybe she was wondering how long I'd be or if I'd remembered to pick up something on my way back. I stepped out into the hallway, answering with a casual, "Hey, what's up?" That's when her voice hit me, cold, almost smug. There was no preamble, no pleasantries. Just, Lucas, I'm divorcing you. Oh, and I've already sold our apartment. Jordan and I are moving in together. Good luck finding a new place. She ended it with a laugh, as if it were the punchline to some cruel joke. For a moment, the world tilted. It was like hearing someone talk about your life as though you weren't in the room. Divorce? Jordan? Sold the apartment? Her words came fast and sharp, each one more jarring than the last. But in that split second, I knew one thing. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crack. I forced my voice to stay calm, my tone as neutral as I could make it. Sounds good, I replied, as if she'd just told me she'd switched brands of coffee. Her silence on the other end was brief, but I knew it was there. She'd expected outrage, maybe even a pleading response. Instead, I gave her indifference. Inside, though, it wasn't indifference. Inside was a storm, a mixture of anger, hurt, and disbelief. 6 years of marriage, and this was how it ended? Over a phone call? Her voice, filled with casual entitlement, kept playing in my mind. Jordan and I are moving in together. Jordan, the boyfriend I didn't know existed until 5 seconds ago. She'd been lying to me for months, maybe longer. And now she had the audacity to laugh about it? But what hit me the hardest was the apartment. Our apartment. It wasn't just walls and furniture. It was everything we'd worked for together. Every inch of that place held memories of late-night talks, arguments, laughter, and dreams. And now she'd sold it, just like that, without even telling me. I took a deep breath, my hand tightening around the phone. She wasn't done yet. "You probably think you're going to fight this, Lucas," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "But it's done. The paperwork's signed, and Jordan and I are moving on. Maybe you should too." "Got it," I said simply, still refusing to give her what she wanted. I hung up before she could say anything else. Standing there in the hallway, the weight of what had just happened began to settle. My wife had not only decided to leave me, but she'd also orchestrated it with such calculation that I almost had to admire the nerve. Almost. But admiration was far from what I felt. What I did feel, though, was resolve. She thought she'd outsmarted me, thought she held all the cards. But Vanessa didn't know everything. She didn't know about the quiet move I'd made months ago when we refinanced the apartment. She didn't know the deed was solely in my name. And that was her first mistake. I returned to the conference room, sat back down, and stared blankly at the paperwork in front of me. My mind wasn't on the client anymore. It was back home, in that apartment I now knew she and Jordan were planning to claim as their love nest. The betrayal stung, but beneath it, something else was brewing: determination. I wouldn't let her take everything from me. I wouldn't let her laugh her way into a new life while I scrambled to piece mine back together. No, Vanessa didn't realize it yet, but she just handed me the upper hand. As the rest of the meeting dragged on, I kept a poker face, nodding at the right moments and offering polite responses. But my mind was elsewhere, plotting, preparing. By the time I left the building, I wasn't the same man who had answered that phone call. I was ready to fight, ready to show Vanessa and Jordan exactly what happens when you underestimate someone who's been paying attention all along. The flight home couldn't come soon enough. The plane ride home was uneventful, but my mind was anything but calm. Vanessa's words kept replaying in my head, each syllable a hammer against the walls of our history. The betrayal was bad enough, but the sheer arrogance of her move, selling the apartment, the one thing that had been our shared dream, our first major milestone as a couple, without a second thought, it was like she'd erased me from her life with the stroke of a pen. But here's the thing about Vanessa. She never read the fine print. She was always the type to skim through agreements, signing her name with that same air of confidence she wore like a badge. She left the details to me, trusting that I'd figure it all out. Funny, isn't it? The very habit that had frustrated me for years was now my saving grace. Months ago, when we refinanced the apartment for a lower interest rate, I made a decision. A quiet, calculated move. At the time, it seemed practical. With the new terms, it made sense to transfer the deed into my name alone. I didn't even think twice about it. It was just one of those things you do to streamline the paperwork. Vanessa hadn't objected. In fact, she'd barely looked at the documents before signing them. I hadn't mentioned it since because, honestly, why would I? It wasn't a secret, just a detail that didn't come up. Until now, Vanessa's arrogance blinded her to the reality of the situation. She thought she could sell the apartment and walk away with the money, leaving me in the dust. But she didn't realize that the deed, the one legal document that decided ownership, had my name on it and mine alone. As I sat on that plane, staring at the clouds outside the window, I couldn't help but smile. She'd sold something that wasn't hers to sell. And while I was furious at her betrayal, there was a sense of satisfaction in knowing I held the upper hand. When I landed and turned my phone back on, I had no messages from Vanessa. No smug follow-ups, no taunts. She probably assumed I was too busy wallowing in self-pity to respond. Little did she know, I was gearing up for the fight of my life. My first call wasn't to her. It was to Chloe, my lawyer and an old college friend. I'd helped her move into her first apartment years ago, and she'd always joked that I'd get the family discount if I ever needed her services. Now, it seemed, it was time to cash in. "Lucas," Chloe said when she picked up. "What's going on? You don't usually call me during work hours." I explained everything: the phone call, the apartment, Jordan, and Vanessa's delusions of grandeur. By the time I finished, Chloe was silent for a moment, and then she laughed. A sharp, incredulous laugh. "She sold the apartment?" she repeated. "Lucas, does she even know she can't legally do that?" "Apparently not," I said, the faintest hint of amusement in my voice. "Well," Chloe said, her tone turning serious, "this is going to be interesting. First, we'll need to notify the buyer that the sale is void. If Vanessa's already taken their money, that could open up a whole new can of worms. Fraud charges, for starters. The word fraud sent a jolt of satisfaction through me. Vanessa thought she was so clever, pulling the rug out from under me. But in her rush to start her new life, she'd overlooked one critical detail. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. "For now, gather everything, emails, documents, anything related to the refinancing and the deed," Chloe said. "I'll handle the legal side. But Lucas, if she's already bragging about this to you, she's probably told other people too. She's digging her own grave, and we just need to give her a push." I hung up feeling lighter than I had in days. The betrayal still stung, but knowing that Vanessa's scheme was unraveling gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt since that phone call. When I got home that evening, I didn't waste time. I pulled out the deed, the refinancing paperwork, and every email exchange related to the apartment. Each piece of evidence felt like a small victory, a reminder that Vanessa's carelessness would be her undoing. I placed the documents in a neat stack on the dining table, then sat back and stared at them. This wasn't just about the apartment anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, about showing Vanessa that I wasn't the pushover she'd assumed I was. She thought she'd won. She thought she could walk away with everything, laughing at my expense. But Vanessa had underestimated me, and soon enough, she'd realized just how big of a mistake that was. The drive back to the apartment was surreal. I'd spent the entire flight planning out what I'd say, how I'd handle the confrontation. Vanessa had no idea what was coming, and that thought gave me a strange sense of calm. For once, the scales weren't tipped in her favor. The moment I walked through the door, I could feel it. The apartment was different. Her presence was heavy in the air, but not in the familiar way. No, this was different. It was like she'd claimed the space as her own, as if my existence within these walls was already erased. Her voice reached me before her face did. She was in the living room, chatting animatedly with someone. I turned the corner and stopped in my tracks. There she was, standing next to a man I could only assume was Jordan. He was younger than I expected, tall and smug, with the kind of confidence that comes from thinking you've won a prize. Vanessa spotted me first. Her smile faltered for just a second before she plastered it back on. "Oh, Lucas, you're back," she said, her tone dripping with false cheer. Jordan looked over, and I swear he smirked. He actually smirked, as if I were some minor inconvenience in his new life. "I didn't realize you'd be home so soon," Vanessa continued, her voice carefully neutral. "Jordan and I were just discussing some plans for the apartment." Plans? For my apartment? The audacity of it almost made me laugh. But I didn't. I just stepped further into the room, set my bag down, and looked at them both. "Vanessa," I said, my voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." Her smile wavered. "Lucas, can it wait? We're kind of in the middle of something." "No," I said, crossing my arms. "It can't." Jordan glanced at her, then back at me. "Look, man," he said, his tone patronizing. "I get that this is hard for you, but Vanessa and I—" "This doesn't concern you," I cut in, my eyes never leaving Vanessa's. The room went quiet. Vanessa's confident demeanor began to crack as I pulled out the deed from my bag. I held it up, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. "What's that?" she asked, her voice tight. "It's the deed to this apartment," I said, my tone steady. "The one that's in my name. Only my name." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of panic. "What are you talking about?" she asked, though her voice lacked the usual confidence. "After we refinanced, I had the deed transferred to my name. You signed the paperwork without even reading it, remember?" I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "So no, Vanessa, you didn't sell this apartment. You can't sell something you don't own." Jordan's smirk vanished. He turned to her, confusion and irritation written all over his face. "Is this true?" he demanded. "Of course not," she snapped, though her voice wavered. She turned back to me, her eyes narrowing. "You're lying." I didn't bother arguing. I simply set the deed on the coffee table in front of them. Jordan picked it up, scanning the document. His expression darkened as he realized the truth. "Vanessa," he said slowly, "what is this?" She sputtered, her confidence unraveling. It's nothing. He's just trying to scare us." I let out a dry laugh. "Scare you?" Vanessa, I'm just getting started. The sale you made? Void. The money you've taken? If you've spent a single cent of it, you're looking at fraud charges. Her face went pale. You're bluffing. Am I? I countered, stepping closer. Go ahead. Call your buyer. See how they feel about being scammed. Jordan stepped back, holding up his hands. Whoa. Fraud? Scammed? I didn't sign up for this. He looked at Vanessa, his tone turning accusatory. You said this place was yours, that you'd already sold it. It is, she insisted, her voice growing desperate. I mean, it was supposed to be. Jordan shook his head, taking another step back. I'm not getting involved in this mess, he muttered. I crossed my arms, watching the cracks spread in their little fantasy. So, I said, addressing them both, here's how this is going to work. Vanessa, you're going to pack your things and leave. You too, Jordan. You have no right to be here, and I'm done playing nice. You can't do this, Vanessa hissed, her voice trembling with anger. This is our home. No, I said firmly. This is my home, and you're not welcome in it anymore. Jordan didn't need any more convincing. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, throwing one last look at Vanessa. Good luck, he said coldly before walking out. Vanessa turned to me, her eyes blazing. You're going to regret this, she spat. I met her gaze, unflinching. No, Vanessa, you're the one who's going to regret it. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. For the first time in days, the apartment felt like mine again. And it was just the beginning. Jordan's departure had been satisfying, but I knew the chaos wasn't over. Vanessa, as predictable as ever, wasn't someone who would simply slink away in silence. Still, I couldn't help but relish the look on Jordan's face when he'd finally pieced it all together. His smug confidence crumbling into confusion and irritation as he realized the tangled mess Vanessa had dragged him into. It wasn't just the fraud that had shaken him. It was the betrayal. He had believed her, trusted her when she said the apartment was hers to sell, that their new life together was built on solid ground. Watching him crumble under the weight of her lies was almost poetic. But let's rewind for a moment. When Jordan first showed up with Vanessa, he carried himself like he owned the place. His every glance and gesture radiated arrogance, like a man confident he'd won the jackpot. I'd seen men like him before, the ones who mistake audacity for power, who think they've outsmarted the world when, in reality, they're standing on quicksand. When I revealed the truth about the deed, his transformation was immediate. It started small, a flicker of doubt in his eyes as he scanned the document I'd placed on the coffee table. I watched him read it, his lips tightening with each line. By the time he looked up, the confidence was gone, replaced by something far more satisfying. Panic. Vanessa, he had said, his voice low and strained. What is this? Vanessa, true to form, had tried to bluff her way out of it. It's nothing, Jordan. He's just trying to mess with us. Don't fall for it. But Jordan wasn't buying it. Not anymore. He wasn't the sharpest guy, but even he could connect the dots. The legal jargon in the deed, my calm and unwavering demeanor, Vanessa's growing desperation. It all painted a picture he couldn't ignore. You told me this place was yours, he said, his voice rising. You said you'd already sold it. Was that a lie too? Vanessa shot me a venomous glare, as if this were somehow my fault. It wasn't a lie, she snapped at him, though her voice wavered. I didn't know about the deed being in his name, okay? It's a technicality. A technicality? Jordan scoffed, holding up the deed. This says he owns the apartment outright. That's not a technicality, Vanessa. That's fraud. The word hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Vanessa's face paled, her bravado crumbling. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. You planned this, didn't you? You knew I'd try to sell it, and you just sat there, waiting to humiliate me. I raised an eyebrow. You gave me far too much credit. I didn't plan anything, Vanessa. You did this all on your own. Jordan's frustration boiled over. You didn't tell me any of this, Vanessa. You said you had everything under control. Do you even realize what kind of position this puts me in? I can't be involved in something like this. You're not involved. Vanessa snapped, her voice shrill. This is between me and Lucas. Really? He shot back. Because I'm standing in the middle of his apartment, holding a deed that says I have no business being here. Sounds pretty involved to me. I couldn't help but interject. He's not wrong, Vanessa. Fraud charges don't look good on anyone's record. And if you've already taken money from the buyer, well, let's just say this situation isn't going to end the way you think it will. Jordan ran a hand through his hair, visibly grappling with the realization that his perfect new life was unraveling before it even began. I'm out, he said abruptly, stepping away from Vanessa. Her eyes widened. What do you mean, you're out? I mean I'm done, he said, his tone sharp. This isn't what I signed up for. You lied to me, and now you're dragging me into your mess. Figure it out on your own. With that, he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Vanessa scrambled after him, her voice pleading. Jordan, wait. Don't go. We can fix this. Just give me a chance to. He didn't even look back. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving her standing there, stunned. For a moment, I thought she might actually cry. She turned back to me, her face a mixture of rage and despair. Are you happy now? She spat. You've ruined everything. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I didn't ruin anything, Vanessa. You did that all on your own. You lied, you schemed, and now you're facing the consequences. Maybe it's time you start taking responsibility for your actions. Her anger flared, but she didn't have a response. She stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I could hear her throwing things around, muttering under her breath. As I stood there, the silence after Jordan's departure was almost peaceful. Watching him realize the truth and walk away was the cherry on top of an already satisfying confrontation. Vanessa had overplayed her hand, and now she was left to pick up the pieces, alone. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was truly in control. The game wasn't over, but the tide had definitely turned in my favor. Vanessa's anger could have powered a small city that night. I could hear her pacing in the bedroom, tossing her things around, and muttering curses under her breath. The sound of hangers clattering to the floor and the occasional thud of her suitcase hitting the bed didn't bother me. I just sat in the living room, enjoying the silence between her outbursts. I'd already won this round, and we both knew it. Jordan's dramatic exit had left her reeling, and for the first time since she'd made that smug phone call, Vanessa wasn't in control. It was my turn now, and she hated every second of it. She burst out of the bedroom after what felt like an hour, her face flushed and her expression twisted with frustration. You think you've won, don't you? She said, her voice sharp and accusatory. I leaned back on the couch, crossing my arms. Won? Vanessa, this isn't a game. This is my life. You're the one who decided to turn it into a circus. She let out a bitter laugh. Oh, please, don't act like some innocent victim here. You knew about the deed. You planned this. You've been waiting for a moment like this to rub it in my face. I shrugged, refusing to take the bait. You didn't care about the details, Vanessa. You never have. I didn't need to plan anything because your arrogance did all the work for me. You signed the paperwork without even reading it. That's not on me, that's on you. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and for a moment, I thought she might actually scream. But instead, she took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. Fine, she said, her tone dripping with venom. You've made your point. Congratulations. What do you want, Lucas? Do you want me to beg? Is that it? I raised an eyebrow. Beg? No, Vanessa. I don't want anything from you. I just want you to leave. You and your grand plans for this apartment can find somewhere else to play house. Her face twisted with fury, but there was something else beneath it. Panic. Real panic. She had underestimated me, and now she was grasping at straws. You can't just kick me out, she said, her voice trembling. I have nowhere to go. Then I suggest you start figuring it out, I replied, my tone calm but firm. Because this is my home, and you're no longer welcome here. She stared at me, her lips trembling as she tried to come up with a response. Finally, she let out a frustrated growl and stormed back into the bedroom. Moments later, she emerged with a suitcase in tow. "You're going to regret this," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and desperation. I stood, meeting her gaze with steady resolve. "No, Vanessa, you're the one who's going to regret this. You thought you could sell this apartment, take the money, and waltz off into the sunset with Jordan. Now look at you. No apartment, no money, and no boyfriend." She flinched at my words, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there, her hands tightening around the handle of her suitcase. "I'll give you a few days to figure out where you're going," I continued. "But make no mistake, you're leaving. And the sooner, the better." Her eyes burned with fury, but she didn't argue. She turned on her heel and dragged her suitcase out the door, slamming it behind her. The silence that followed was deafening, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe again. Vanessa's panic had been palpable, her desperation like a weight hanging in the air. But now, she was gone, and the apartment, my apartment, felt lighter without her. I knew this wasn't the end. Vanessa wasn't the type to give up so easily, and I fully expected her to try something else. But for now, I'd won. And that was enough. As I sat back on the couch, I allowed myself a small smile. She thought she could bulldoze her way through my life, but she hadn't counted on one thing. Me. I wasn't the naive, trusting husband she thought I was. I was done being her pawn. And now, for the first time in a long time, I was finally free. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet, after Vanessa left. Her absence was like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in weeks, the tension that had been hanging over me like a storm cloud began to lift. I stood in the living room, looking around at the remnants of a life we'd built together. It was strange, how something that once felt so permanent could now feel so foreign. But I wasn't one to dwell on the past. Vanessa had underestimated me, and I wasn't about to waste this opportunity to take full control of my life. This wasn't just about reclaiming my home. It was about reclaiming myself. The first thing I did was pack up her things. I didn't want her energy, her entitlement, or her lies lingering in my space any longer. I grabbed a few empty boxes from the closet and started sorting through her belongings. The process was oddly therapeutic. Each item I placed in the box felt like shedding a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. Her shoes, tossed carelessly by the door, boxed. Her collection of designer handbags, boxed. The framed photos she insisted on hanging in the hallway, even though I hated them, down they came. I didn't break or damage anything, not because I was feeling generous, but because I wanted to do this with dignity. Vanessa had brought enough chaos into my life. I didn't need to stoop to her level. Once I'd cleared her things, the apartment already felt different. The clutter, both physical and emotional, was gone. It was just me now, in a space that was finally my own. Next, I called Chloe. She'd been my rock through this entire ordeal, and I knew she'd have the next steps ready. "How's it going over there?" she asked, her tone both professional and sympathetic. "Quiet," I replied. "Vanessa's gone. For now, at least." "Good," Chloe said. "Let's keep it that way. I've already notified the buyer about the voided sale, and they're not happy with Vanessa. They're fully cooperating with us, which makes this much easier." "What about Vanessa?" I asked. "She's in a tight spot," Chloe said with a hint of satisfaction. "If she's already spent any of the deposit money, that's on her. And if she tries to push back, we'll move forward with fraud charges." The word fraud still sent a satisfying chill down my spine. Vanessa had always believed she was untouchable, that she could manipulate and bulldoze her way through any situation. Now, she was finally learning the hard way that actions have consequences. "Do we need to do anything else right now?" I asked. "For now, just hold your ground," Chloe said. "Make it clear that the apartment is yours and that you won't tolerate any more nonsense from her. I'll handle the legal side of things, and we'll move forward with the divorce paperwork soon." I thanked her and hung up, feeling more grounded than I had in weeks. Chloe was right. This was my home, and I wasn't going to let Vanessa or anyone else take that away from me. With that in mind, I started reclaiming the space. The oversized gaming chair Vanessa had hated, I dragged it out of the corner and placed it by the window, where I could sit and enjoy the view. The minimalist artwork I'd always loved but she dismissed as boring, back on the walls. I even rearranged the furniture, shifting everything to reflect my tastes rather than hers. It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about making the apartment feel like mine again. By the time I was done, the space looked and felt entirely different. It was cleaner, brighter, more personal. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was my sanctuary, my starting point for the next chapter of my life. Later that evening, my best friend Ethan came over with a bottle of bourbon. He took one look around and let out a low whistle. "Wow," he said, sinking into the couch. "This place looks different." "It's mine now," I said simply, pouring us both a glass. Ethan raised his glass in a toast to taking control and kicking toxic people to the curb. I clinked my glass against his, a small smile playing at my lips. To fresh starts. As the night wore on, the weight of the past few weeks began to lift. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. Taking control of the apartment was only the beginning. I was ready to move forward, to build a life that was entirely my own. And as I sat there, surrounded by the warmth of good company and the quiet satisfaction of victory, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't just reclaiming a space. I was reclaiming myself. The days following Vanessa's departure were a whirlwind of closure and clarity. For all her threats and dramatics, I knew Vanessa wasn't going to let things end quietly. True to form, she tried everything to claw her way back into control. Calls, emails, and even a few surprise visits to the apartment. Each one was a desperate attempt to salvage a situation she had already lost. Her tone alternated between pleading and accusatory. One day, she'd leave voicemails begging for another chance. "Lucas, we can fix this. It doesn't have to end this way. You know I didn't mean for things to get so messy." The next, her messages were filled with venom. "You're being petty, Lucas. I hope you're happy ruining my life." I didn't respond. Not once. The days of entertaining her manipulations were over. Every call, every message was just another reminder of why I was better off without her. Jordan's fallout with her had only made things worse. Apparently, he'd completely distanced himself after realizing the full extent of her lies and the legal mess she'd created. She was on her own now, and the isolation was clearly driving her to desperation. Chloe, ever the professional, kept me updated on the legal proceedings. "She's panicking," Chloe said during one of our calls. "The buyer isn't pressing charges, but they're furious. Vanessa's burned bridges she can't rebuild. And the divorce? She's got no leverage, Lucas. You're walking away clean." Hearing those words was like a weight being lifted off my chest. For years, I'd felt trapped in a marriage where I was constantly second-guessed, dismissed, and taken for granted. Now, with every legal step finalized, I could feel the chains breaking. When the divorce papers arrived for her signature, Vanessa made one last-ditch effort to stall. She sent a long email filled with excuses and half-hearted apologies, trying to paint herself as the victim. She claimed she had acted out of fear and felt neglected in our marriage. It was almost laughable. But the best part? Chloe's airtight preparation meant that Vanessa couldn't stall for long. A few weeks later, she finally signed the papers. Just like that, it was over. The day the divorce was finalized felt like the end of a long, grueling marathon. I stood in the middle of the apartment, my apartment, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The space felt lighter, freer, like it had been purged of all the negativity Vanessa had brought into it. That evening, Ethan came by again, this time with takeout and another bottle of bourbon. "So, it's official?" he asked, leaning back on the couch. "It's official," I said, pouring us each a glass. "To freedom," he said, raising his glass with a grin. "To freedom," I echoed, clinking my glass against his. The days that followed were filled with small victories. I continued reclaiming the apartment, turning it into a space that truly reflected who I was. The gaming setup Vanessa hated? Front and center in the living room. The artwork she called boring, proudly displayed on the walls. I even bought a new couch, one that felt like it belonged in my home, not ours. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't walking on eggshells, trying to appease someone who never appreciated me. I was living for myself, and it felt damn good. One evening, as I was sorting through some old paperwork, I came across a photo of Vanessa and me. It was from the early days of our marriage, back when things still felt hopeful. We were smiling, arms around each other, looking like a couple who had it all figured out. I stared at the photo for a long moment. There had been good times, sure, but they were buried under years of neglect, manipulation, and betrayal. That photo was a snapshot of a moment that no longer existed, a life that had ended long before that phone call. I slipped the photo into an envelope and tucked it away in a drawer. It wasn't something I wanted to see every day, but I wasn't ready to throw it away, either. It was a part of my past, but it didn't define me. The apartment had become more than just a place to live. It was a symbol of my resilience. I'd fought for it, stood my ground, and come out on top. It was a reminder that I was capable of reclaiming not just my space, but my life. In the weeks that followed, I started planning for the future. The divorce had closed one chapter, but it also opened the door to endless possibilities. I didn't know exactly what the next step would be, but I knew one thing for certain. It would be on my terms. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free from Vanessa, free from her lies, and free from the weight of a marriage that had been dragging me down. As I sat on my newly purchased couch that night, a glass of bourbon in hand and the city lights twinkling outside, I couldn't help but smile. This was my life now. Simple, peaceful, and entirely mine. The weeks following the divorce felt surreal, like waking up from a nightmare and realizing the sun was finally shining again. The legal battles were over, Vanessa was out of my life, and the apartment, my sanctuary, had become a symbol of everything I'd fought to reclaim. But what came next was the part one hadn't expected: peace. It was the kind of peace that came with knowing I'd survived something that could have broken me. I didn't just survive, though, I thrived. I rebuilt, one small step at a time, and each step brought me closer to a life that felt entirely my own. I started with the apartment. It wasn't just about redecorating. It was about turning the space into a reflection of who I was without Vanessa's influence. The oversized gaming chair I loved, but she loathed. It had a new home by the window, where I could sit and look out over the city while losing myself in a good game. The minimalist artwork she'd once dismissed as boring was back on the walls, and I even splurged on a new couch. A sleek, modern piece that fit perfectly with the new vibe of the place. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Each change I made felt like a step toward reclaiming my identity. The apartment was no longer a shared space filled with compromise and resentment. It was mine, a sanctuary that radiated warmth, freedom, and possibility. One evening, as I was reorganizing a closet, I came across a box of old photos. Among them was one of Vanessa and me, taken during the early days of our marriage. We were smiling, arms around each other, looking like a couple who had it all figured out. I stared at the photo for a long moment. It was strange, seeing a version of myself that felt so far removed from who I was now. Back then, I thought I knew what love looked like, what partnership meant, but hindsight has a way of stripping away illusions. I slipped the photo into an envelope and tucked it into the back of the closet. It wasn't something I wanted to look at often, but I wasn't ready to throw it away either. That part of my life, as painful as it had been, had shaped me. It wasn't about holding on to the past. It was about acknowledging it and letting it serve as a reminder of how far I'd come. With the apartment fully reclaimed, I turned my attention to the future. For years, I'd been so wrapped up in trying to hold my marriage together that I'd put my own dreams on hold. Now, with nothing holding me back, the possibilities felt endless. I started setting goals, personal, professional, even recreational. I signed up for a cooking class, something I'd always wanted to do but never got around to. I reconnected with old friends, people I drifted away from during the years I spent walking on eggshells around Vanessa. Ethan, my best friend, was a constant presence through it all. One evening, we sat on the balcony with a bottle of bourbon, talking about everything and nothing. "You know," he said, raising his glass, "I've gotta say, man, you're glowing these days. Single life suits you." I laughed, taking a sip of my drink. "It's not about being single," I said. "It's about being free. For the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm living under someone else's rules." "To freedom," Ethan said, clinking his glass against mine. "To freedom, I echoed, smiling. The divorce hadn't just ended my marriage. It had opened the door to a new chapter, one where I called the shots. The resentment, the self-doubt, the constant feeling of being trapped. They were all gone, replaced by a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in years. But the biggest change wasn't the apartment or my new hobbies. It was my mindset. I'd always thought of myself as someone who avoided confrontation, someone who kept the peace at all costs. But this experience had shown me that I was stronger than I ever realized. Vanessa had underestimated me. She thought she could bulldoze her way through my life, take everything, and leave me scrambling in the wreckage. But she was wrong. Her arrogance was her downfall, and my quiet resilience was my victory. One day, while scrolling through emails, I saw a message from her. The subject line read, "Can we talk?" I didn't even open it. Whatever she had to say, it didn't matter. My focus was forward, not back. Life didn't change overnight, but little by little, I built something new. The apartment became a haven, a place filled with laughter, warmth, and the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. The friendships I rekindled reminded me of the importance of surrounding myself with people who truly cared. And through it all, I learned to trust myself again. For years, I doubted my instincts, second-guessed every decision, and let someone else's needs overshadow my own. But now, I knew better. I knew what I deserved, and I wasn't willing to settle for anything less. The night everything finally felt complete was quiet and unremarkable in the best way. I was sitting on my new couch, a glass of wine in hand, watching the city lights twinkle outside the window. The apartment was warm and inviting, a true reflection of me. I thought about everything Vanessa had said during that phone call, the arrogance, the condescension, the smug certainty that she'd won. And I couldn't help but smile. She thought she was walking away with everything, but in reality, she left with nothing. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a life I never knew I could have, one filled with possibility, peace, and the freedom to be exactly who I was meant to be. And for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely free.